Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with New York City jazz arranger and composer Wayne Alpern. We caught up with this Detroit native in late April 2020 during the beginnings of the COVID-19 pandemic to talk about the artistic uncertainty in the world today. He has spent a lifetime integrating popular and jazz idioms with classical techniques to create a sophisticated contemporary style. His artistic life and journey is a vastly interesting tale. Please get to know him. Enjoy.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, I take a certain amount of comfort in it because I think people are trapped in their homes, and this gives them something to listen to that they might not otherwise. And so I feel that I'm communicating with a lot of people. I hope I am. And you've heard the work. I think it's somewhat different than the average, than a lot of the albums out there. So I hope I'm bringing some joy to people who might have a chance to listen to it through people like you. I think you're doing a service too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants. So, but let me ask you this: all of this started somewhere. Talk to me about where you were born and raised, and how the jazz became your existence.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Detroit, way back in the, I was born in 1948. I'm old, but I grew up listening to Motown. That's all we listened to, until, I played classical piano as a kid, and then, gradually discovered pop piano and from there, but, I was classically trained. I went to Oberlin College. I played in a rock band, and I was always straddling between classical music and pop music. The story of how I became a composer is very strange. It was during the Vietnam period, and I left the country and was living in Mexico. I met a woman down there, as strange as it sounds, who called herself the Princess of Art, and she believed that all of us are creative people, and that our goal in life was to find out our means of creativity. And she said, "You're a composer. She'll be able to composer." So I sat there copying out music. I learned I was just copying Bach and Mozart and everything else, and eventually went to music school, got a degree in classical music, but was always playing jazz and pop music on the side. And I eventually went to music school, got a degree in that. I went to law school. I went to Yale Law School. I dropped out and was studying jazz piano with a man named John Mahegan, who was one of the early great teachers of jazz piano. And John taught me how to improvise, and that changed everything for me. And then I was a lawyer for musicians many years, and I dropped out of that. I taught music at a conservatory, and I'd say somewhere along the line in the 90s or something, I realized that I had to find a way to merge jazz with my classical training. And I looked around. I knew I still know a lot of jazz artists who are very talented on their instruments, but they lack, in my view, the training needed to make a coherent jazz album. They can improvise, but to me, after Parker, when you start seeing such great improvisers, to just hear somebody do their own improvisation without any structure, I thought for me was a dead end in jazz. I still feel a lot of jazz is just wallowing in kind of aimless, almost indulgent improvisation. I think so. I was trying to combine that with the structure and the discipline that I learned in classical music. And likewise, I know a lot of classical musicians. They can't improvise. They lack the spontaneity. Yeah, they can sit there and play Beethoven, but you take the score away from them, they can't do anything. So my goal, my personal agenda, is try to combine the discipline of classical music, the things I learned. I mean, counterpoint. I studied endless amount of counterpoint. I studied Renaissance counterpoint. I studied atonal music. I studied African music, all kinds of music, and try to merge that with the spontaneity of jazz, which to me is original American music. I wasn't interested in European music. I wasn't interested in anything other than music from America, and to me that's jazz. But the goal was to combine it with technique. So what I'm hoping to do on that album, Standard Deviation, the one before it, Skeleton, I've got another one coming out, Frankenstein. The goal is to integrate these two sources. So that's where I'm at. And then I also write a lot of I just finished a whole LP for string orchestra, also woodwind quintet. But the agenda is always the same, to try to combine, to try to make, you might hold up Duke Ellington, you might hold up Gershwin as great jazz composers, and then combine that with the highest level of improvisation. So I work very closely with my musicians, give them areas where they can stretch out, improvise, but then also put that in the context of a structured piece. I think that, for me, from what people tell me, that's what makes my CDs a little bit different from others. So,
the interesting thing you were saying up front is about, what's going to happen from here with jazz and just even with the arts. And the one thing that jazz has always been really good is that there's been a level of resilience. There's been a level of rebirth and the phoenix coming alive, so to speak. What is it about jazz that can do that? What do you think is going to be about jazz that's going to do that now?
Well, I'll tell you, I think what jazz has always represented the element of human freedom. When you look back at the history of jazz, particularly in the rise of Hitler and the rise of Nazism in Germany, jazz came to Europe, and it was considered, and even the element of syncopation was the antithesis to the Nazi goose step. In other words, the Germans were marching in a rigorous, rigid way. The jazz represented the syncopation, going against the grain, cutting against it. It represents the individual. And you can look back in the history of jazz. To me, the two giants of the history of jazz are, first, Charlie Parker, which to me represents the pinnacle of improvisation. But before him, it's Louis Armstrong. Why? Because Louis Armstrong was the first person to step out in front of the group and in front of the group of Dixieland, where everybody's integrated, to make an individual statement. He said, I'm me. I'm going to be an appearance of an individual. So to me, what it represents is the tension between order, and that's what I'm talking about in the classical music, and freedom. And that's what jazz walks that line between order and freedom. And that's why I think it's always resilient. That's why people love it. It speaks from the individual. Now, of course, well, as you say, with the damn virus, we live in a society. So jazz walks that fine line. I think if it gets to be too much order, then nobody's interested in it. It doesn't have that. It gets too rigid, and a lot of classical music suffers from that. But I think if jazz becomes just too much freedom, in other words, I'm going to stand up in front of the group, I'm going to play a 32 bar head, and that's it, and it's going to be, not even going to be a tune, it's not going to be a standard, it's just going to be a riff, and then here I go, I'm going to start wailing away on my horn. I don't think the average person wants to hear that anymore. I think it's old-fashioned. What they want to hear is somebody interweaving in the tension between order and freedom. I'm quoting the tune. Here's a motive. Now the piece is going to reach a climax. It's going to have some qualities of a composition. But within that, I'm going to show you my freedom. To me, those are the great jazz artists that are able to do that. So that's why I see it. I think jazz performs a critical function in terms of what music is today.
What was the first live jazz show that you saw that made you think that's something I may want to do in my life?
First live, well, let me back up. I think the first, before live, when I was a kid in Detroit, I was around 13, and I had an older cousin, and he called me over to his house one day, and he said, "I want to play something for you, because I know you're into music." And he played two things that I remember. He played Dave Brubeck, Take 5, and he played Herbie Mann at Coming Out Baby, Herbie Mann at the Village Gate, and that blew my mind. I never heard anything like it, and I had grown up playing, Mozart and all that. And when I heard those things, I fell in love with it. And he would take me. There were clubs in Detroit. There was a place called Baker's Keyboard Lounge, and we would go there. I don't remember any specific concerts. I'm trying to think live. I grew up in rock. I was in a rock band. I mean, when I heard Hendrix, I heard Hendrix live, and I will never forget that. It wasn't jazz, but that was a man on his instrument that was so expressive, I couldn't believe it. I mean, other main influences for me, when I heard Bill Evans live, that taught me that you don't have to have a lot of notes, that it's the way he hunched over the piano with a level of intensification. That changed me. I remember Cannonball Adderley changed me. But my biggest influence as a teacher was this man, John Mahegan, who was a jazz pianist in New York in the 50s, and he knew, Art Tatum and everything else. And I went and I remember studying with him, and I played piano with him, and he could take his glasses off, big thick glasses, and he could improvise on any tune for an hour in all 12 keys. And he told me, he said, "Wayne," he says, "you have to throw all the notes away, and you have to learn to fuck the piano." That's what he said. And so I just sat there. He said, you have to grab onto it and make love to this instrument. So he helps me a lot. And then I'd say a number of years, the problem for me is I know many, and and we all hear these performers that are just so talented. I'm not that. I can make my way around, but I don't compose at the piano. I rely on my studies of classical techniques to make improvisations, and I like taking tunes. The thrust behind standard deviation is the idea is to take contemporary tunes, not standards. I love standards. I play standards all the time. But to take the tunes of our time, the tunes of pop music, and treat them as though they were standards, and so that I'm I have other things where I take All the Things You Are or My Funny Valentine, but in this thing I'm taking Dylan tunes. I'm taking Don't Stop Believing. I'm taking Michael Jackson. I'm saying let's take the tunes of our own time, because I know with my kids or even people my age, if you start mentioning I'm old fashioned it's been done too many times. But if I take Four Seasons, Who Loves You Pretty Baby, people know that. They know the tune. They grew up on the tune. They have memories of the tune. And then I take that and I treat that with a jazz. I say, listen, I can take that tune that you know, and I'm going to treat it with sophistication, care. I'm going to develop it, and now you're going to hear some great saxophone player, improvise on that. And I find people respond to it. I can go the other way. Listen, I've taken Mozart sonatas and jazzed them up so that what I like to call it is post-genre music. I find that all these genres are starting to mix, and jazz is the one thing. First of all, I think it's the most universal language that we have. But I want to connect with pop tunes. I take Katy Perry. I take whatever tunes I want. I took the Pharrell tune, Happy. But you give it put it in the hands of jazz artists, and you give it a classical treatment. I've got so many layers going on with this thing. I write fugues with it. At the end of one of these tunes, I'll come in with multiple interests. So I try to treat them with sophistication. But it took me. I'm no youngster. It took me a long time to get to this spot, to have the courage, artistically, to do what I want. Whether I don't know how I'm not aiming to try to become a household name. And then the last thing I want to mention was Parker. I know some top jazz scholars. That's what they do. They are tremendous students of this. And one of them said, listen, the same way that Bach, you want to understand classical music, you've got to go through Bach. You sit at the piano and he said, and that's what you have to do with Parker. You have to treat Parker, and you have to listen to everything. And he says, you go by the Savoy recordings and you listen to it every day for 4 months. When you're done with that, I'll talk to you. But until you do that, I'm not ready to talk to you.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this, kind of just in a very simple way. What do you like best about being a composer and arranger?
Well, for me, it's everything. I mean, it's taken me a lifetime. I have music that I've written going back to 1970, and so it's my life work. And it's taken me a long time after studying to learn how to think in music rather than about it. And it gives me a vehicle for self-expression. It gives me a vehicle to connect with others. It gives me a sense of beauty and of meaning. It's a lot of it's alone. I work very intensely alone to try to craft something, and I decide when I'm done with it, and I revise it. But then when I hook up with performers, there's nothing greater. I try to work very collaboratively. You have to work collaboratively with jazz. When I work with the classical people, you put the notation in front of them. They're great, but they just kind of execute it. When we do this recording, standard deviation, it was, 9 people, all kinds of input. Somebody suggesting this. I mean, even with the subs, on one of those pieces, we had a sub come in, he says, hey, on the bass, he says, why don't we try this arco? I said, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of that thing. I only saw that one guy one time. He was a sub in rehearsal. And absorb that. That's really cool, man. Thank you. And then other people, so everybody's contributing. So that's what I mean. It crosses these things of the individual and society, order and freedom, being alone, being with others. And I also found that my best music teachers, and you can hear this in the greatest jazz artists. Let's take, Clifford Brown. It's, you hear the person coming through. You hear the individual coming through. When you listen to Bill Evans, you hear the individual person. Because in real life, Bill Evans was a shy guy, but he's speaking through that. So composing for me and arranging, I'm a trained composer, but arranging allows me to take music that's already out there that people know and say, look, I'm going to do something with this that you'll recognize. If I just write a new composition, I find people listen to it, okay. And a lot of the jazz composers, all their tunes now are original. Well, okay, I hear it. But if you're going to write an original tune, you better be prepared to compete with, Jerry Mulligan or Gershwin, Richard Rodgers. And I find a lot of it, I just lose interest. But if I take a tune that My Funny Valentine, and try to do it in an original way, or a Dylan tune, or, look at the ones I'm working on, I'm taking Martha Vandella, Dancing in the Streets. I take Marvin Gaye, Ain't That Peculiar. I took Ed Sheeran, songs that I relate to, and then give them to horns, give them to all kinds of instruments. Got some great, fabulous bass players. So, and then I'll tell you, that album there, that took 3 years to make. And largely because I work, I had a great group of people, but I have an audio engineer, Dave Darlington. I don't know if you know his name, but he's just a genius. Well, Dave is just a fantastic guy, and he's willing to deal with my desire for perfection. We sit there. He's working on all my projects now, and he's been around. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to to polish it. And I just said, I said, Dave, I don't know if we're going to make any money on this, but we're going to polish this thing, and we're going to make it so that when people listen to us, it sounds good. And jazz isn't pop. It's what we're really dealing with, I think, here is chamber music. It's the real American chamber music. It's the high art of America. That's what we got here. It's not pop music. It's not come and go. And you have great virtuosos playing it. I'm more interested in who are the great composers. There's some, every time, there's some great arrangers out there. I think Maria Schneider is brilliant. And I like a lot of the old arrangers. There's a lot of people out there. So I'm just happy I can do what I do and try to focus on that. So.
Well, the one thing that's going to be very evident, obviously, is that we're going to get to the end of this COVID-19 world that we're in, and the music will become live again. What revelations or what realizations do you hope both musician and audience?
Hoping we come out of it. I think we'll come out of a deeper appreciation of, there's a lot of things that we're going to appreciate out of this. My daughter's a school teacher. People didn't appreciate how important they were. And I think what's happening when people are alone, they're going to, and hopefully they're listening to your station, other people that got time. Hopefully they're listening more, and they'll start appreciating not only the music, but appreciating what the artists and the people who are making this thing. To devote your life to this. Look at you and I. We could have gone maybe be dentists or something else. I was a lawyer. We're sacrificing part of our life because of a love of music. And if there wasn't that music, life would be pretty darn dreary. And so I'm hoping that people will come out of this thing and realize, there's more to life here, and there's beauty, and that there's people. You can just read about the life story of these musicians, the suffering. I know right now, I got a lot of guys out there sitting in their apartment. They're great saxophone players. They don't have any way to express themselves. They're hurting. They can't make money. They don't have gigs. All the shows have shut down. And I'm trying to give them work. I just sent a whole bunch of scores and parts to a guy. He's going to put them so that we're lining up our next. I got 3 projects in the can that I've given out to these people. Put it together. Get your guys together. When this thing's over, we're going to go and we're going to record those things. So I'm trying to set them up. So I hope people realize, I hope the artists and the musicians come out of it held in a little more high regard, because it's going to be hard. I don't know who's going to go to. Look at 2 weeks before this hit, my wife and I were down at the Village Vanguard. I don't know if you've ever been there, but you go downstairs, crammed in there. It's packed. And we heard the Village Vanguard Orchestra. It was great. And before that, we were up in Dizzy's. We heard Igor Boutman and the Moscow Jazz Orchestra. I mean, they're just absolutely fantastic. But it's a small room. Got people crowded in there. I don't know how that's going to be solved. So I think recorded music and radio stations are going to play a more important role.
Well, and that's one of the things I think that for me personally, I've been trying to really ramp this up and really cover what's going on and get this going, because I think it's a really, I've always felt like it's important, but I think right now with this very surreal time in our world that we've never experienced and may never again, I think we need that community more than ever.
Absolutely, and I think you're in a great spot to do that. I mean, my problem is I as a composer and arranger, I almost try not to listen to things. I'm trying to block out other influences. It's not that I don't. I occasionally do listen to things. I put things on, or I'll turn on stations. I wish there were more jazz stations. I really lament that you can't just go to your radio and hear some quality music. I sometimes find it in my car. But I know you guys are out there, and I want, because when I get hit the playlist, I see like, oh man, that's amazing. I think jazz is at somewhat of a crossroads here, because we don't want to. It is a chamber music; it's a high art form, but we don't want to lose touch with the people, and that's in one reason why I do tunes like Beatles and Dylan, popular tunes. If we become like classical music, just for an audience of just a narrow group of fans, I think we lose contact with the popular vernacular base. And that's I think what jazz's challenge is: how to make high art, how to make sophisticated things that really swing, but how to confront the challenge that rock music presented and absorb that. So I see myself positioned in a way. Look, I've studied all this stuff. Hopefully, I can try to do that. But I think that's our challenge. So we got a lot of challenges here with this damn virus. But even before the virus, I think the challenge of jazz is don't get too too elite here. Little clubs and there's the technique itself. Some jazz artists have such incredible technique. You've heard them. I mean, they're just blow your mind. I was like, listen to, you just, but that's to me the lesson of Bill Evans or Miles. Hey, Miles did it. You play a few notes. You don't need to do all that. Keep it clear. Keep it simple. Keep it expressive. And so that's I don't know. I'm rambling, man.
No, I love it. You're totally right. It's very it's great. I love it. So let me get to the essence of you. Let me ask. Everyone has a perception of you. Your family, your friends, your colleagues.
Yeah.
But you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Who do I? Well, it took me a long. I'm this composer arranger, man. It's taken me a long time because I had multiple careers. I was a lawyer for 20 years. I was a litigator. I would go into New York courts and do battle with people. I would write big briefs. I would argue before, courts. That gave me some mental discipline. And then I went and taught music. I taught in conservatory for, close to 20 years. Taught at Mannes College of Music. It's a big New York conservatory. So I've studied the theory. And after each of those, I finally came to the realization that I value creativity, my own creativity. And so I had, by that point, compiled a lot of music, and I had written a lot of music. But it takes time to have, I think for any artist, to have the courage to be themselves. That doesn't mean don't get training. Because they teach a lot of young people, oh no, you don't need to be any influencers, no training. No, you need that. But ultimately, you have to say goodbye to all those influences. I have a friend who's a painter. Not successful at all, but he's probably the most artistic person I know. And he loves to quote Cézanne, the painter. And he said, Cézanne says, from the time of being a little kid to the age of 40, the artist must go to the museum every day. And after the age of 40, the artist must never go to the museum. Because at that point, you don't want the influences. Now, it doesn't mean that occasionally I won't put on Oscar Peterson and say, okay, here's what it is. Here's what swinging is, or here's what authenticity is. So I do that. And I listen to, I'm a big fan of Wynton Marsalis. Why? Because he speaks from the heart. He's a soul of jazz, and but ultimately you got to find out who you are, and it's taken me a long time. And so, look, I listen to that standard deviation. I know I can hear better music. It doesn't matter to me. That's the best I could do, and I feel good about it. And I get criticism. It just doesn't matter, So that's
Yeah.
who I feel I am. I've got, with the time that's left to me, I've got more music. I got a whole album of string quartets here. I'm looking for the right string quartet. I just finished one with the Dorian Woodwind Quintet, classical group. But what did I give them? I gave them 20 arrangements of pop tunes. They're doing Beauty and the Beast. They're doing Downton Abbey. They're doing Ornithology, and they love it. And they go on their classical concerts. They put these things on the end at the encore, and people go crazy. Why? Because they hear somebody, hey, you're crossing genres. That's what I like. Sure, I want to hear that, but I also want to hear this. I think jazz has that. That's what jazz, as you said, jazz is resilient. It can go in a lot of different directions. So and you see people like, Leonard Bernstein. They just had a tribute to him. I mean, my God, this guy, it's classical, it's jazz, it's everything. Gershwin. And you know what? When you look at the history of music, these guys back in the day, they were doing the same thing. When you look at Haydn and Mozart, they were taking the pop songs of their day. That's what they were doing. Even the people in the Renaissance, they were making Renaissance masses on the basis of popular songs of the day, so that they were appealing to a wide audience. And they were saying, listen, I'm going to take the stuff that's lying around here, the stuff that everybody knows. I'm not going to be elitist about this. I'm going to take this, I'm trying to elevate it. I'm going to elevate it, brighten up your day, so that what you think, what others are telling us about the low level of our music, I'm going to take it, I'm going to treat it with respect. That's what, take James Brown. I'm going to take that, I'm going to treat it with some respect. I took Carole King. I took You've Got a Friend. Everybody knows that tune. But now when you crank it up with some high, some big brass, have a solo in there. I don't know. That's my orientation.
I like it. Wayne, thanks for taking some time out. It's quite an extraordinary time on this planet. I appreciate you, talking about the music.
It is. And man, listen, I want to thank you too, because you didn't have to do this. I don't know if Carrie Gaffney or how you got to me, but I really appreciate, most of my day is sitting here. I'm writing the music, but it's a real honor to be called up by a guy. I know you come across a lot of music, and I have a lot of respect for Kansas City too, and the history of jazz too. So I want to thank you too for reaching out to me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Detroit, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Wayne for his time, music, and dedication to jazz. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com for everything Neon Jazz all the time. Go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.